The first thing Theron Ashford noticed was the cold. Not the clean cold of a winter camp or the biting cold of mountain passes he'd crossed with a blade in each hand. This was different. Stale. Trapped. The kind of cold that lived in stone rooms that hadn't seen sunlight in years. The second thing he noticed was that his hands were wrong. Too thin. Too soft. The knuckles weren't scarred. The calluses from 15 years of gripping sword hilts and rifle stocks and the throats of men who deserved it were simply gone. His eyes opened. Stone ceiling. Narrow window. Frost on the glass. Pre-dawn light bleeding grey through the cracks. A single bed beneath him. A locked door across the room. The chemical burn of suppressors in his veins, thick and industrial. The kind they used on prisoners being transported through hostile territory. He catalogued everything in 3 seconds. It was an old habit. One that had kept him alive through 2 wars, 7 assassinations, and a final stand against a slaver squad that he'd known he wouldn't walk away from. The refugees had gotten out. That was what mattered. The rest was just math. He should be dead. He was not dead. His body was wrong, and the room was wrong, and the suppressor burn meant someone had been drugging him long before he woke up in a skin that didn't fit. Theron sat up. His new body protested. Weaker. Smaller. He'd been an alpha in his first life. Broad shoulders, quick reflexes, the kind of physical presence that made people step back before they decided whether to fight. This body was built for something else entirely. Lighter bones. Narrower frame. The faint honey-sweet undertone of omega biology buried beneath layers of chemical suppression. Someone had bought this body. Someone had drugged it. Someone was going to explain. The door opened without knocking. A servant entered. Young. Nervous. The kind of nervous that came from delivering bad news to people who couldn't fight back. He was carrying a tray with a cup of something steaming and a small folded cloth. His eyes didn't meet Theron's. His shoulders were curled forward in the specific way of someone who'd learned that being seen meant being blamed. "The king will see you at first bell," the servant said. His voice was practiced. Flat. The tone you used on livestock being prepped for inspection. "You'll need to bathe first. The water's already drawn. I'll lay out your clothes while you—" "Where am I?" The servant stopped. Blinked. His mouth opened, then closed again. Theron swung his legs off the bed. The movement was slower than he wanted. The body wasn't cooperating the way his old one had. But his eyes stayed steady. His voice stayed flat. The voice of someone conducting an interrogation, not a conversation. 3 questions. Where am I? Who purchased this body? And what do they expect it to do? The servant's face went pale. No Omega delivered to this tower had ever asked questions. Theron understood that immediately from the way the man froze. The others had arrived weeping, or seducing, or trembling in terrified silence, waiting to be told what their new life would cost them. None of them had woken up, catalogued their tactical disadvantages, and started demanding answers like a field commander assessing enemy positions. "You're in the king's tower," the servant said carefully. "North wing. Private quarters. You were brought here 3 days ago. You've been sleeping. Purchased. By whom?" "The king's steward. Bram Collier. On behalf of the crown." Theron filed the name away. "And what does the crown expect this body to do?" The servant's throat moved. Swallowing. "You were sent as a gift. To calm the cursed king. To reach him. The others couldn't. They tried. They all tried. But the curse," he stopped. His hands were shaking now, very slightly, the tray rattling. "Explain." Slowly. So the servant did. He told Theron about the curse. 15 years old. Cast by a rival mage who'd wanted the king destroyed, not in battle, but slowly. The kind of magic that turned joy into agony, hope into poison, genuine emotion into a weapon aimed directly at the king's nervous system. Every Omega sent to the tower had tried the same things. Seduction. Submission. Heat. Desperate. Cloying sweetness meant to soothe. Every single one had triggered the curse within minutes. Some had been sent away. Others hadn't survived the experience at all. And now Theron was here. The newest attempt. The freshest sacrifice. They told me I was a gift, Theron said flatly. For calming him. Yes. And if I fail? The servant's silence was answer enough. Theron sat there for a long moment. The suppressor burn pulsed beneath his skin. His new body's instincts were stirring, sluggish and confused, like an animal waking from hibernation it hadn't chosen. Somewhere deep in his chest, the previous occupant's memories flickered. Being sold by a family that had run out of use for him. Being told he was a solution. Being warned that if he failed, there would be no second delivery. No home to return to. No one waiting. Theron closed his eyes. He made the same decision he'd made bleeding out in the snow 3 weeks ago. The same decision he'd made every time someone weaker needed protection and someone stronger was busy being cruel. Survive first. Ask questions later. Protect anyone weaker than you in the process. He opened his eyes. First bell. How long? 2 hours. Good. Leave the tray. Tell the steward I'll be there. The servant hesitated. His expression flickered. Not quite confusion. Something closer to hope. As if he'd been waiting for someone to arrive who didn't follow the script. And now that someone was here, and the servant didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Theron sat in the grey pre-dawn light and assessed his situation. He was in a body that wasn't his. He was drugged with industrial-grade suppressors that were already starting to fail at the edges. He was expected to perform emotional labor for a cursed king who destroyed every Omega sent before him. And he had 2 hours before he had to walk into a room full of people who thought they'd bought a compliant toy and make it clear they'd gotten something else entirely. It wasn't the worst tactical situation he'd ever faced. It wasn't even in the top 10. Theron reached for the cup of whatever was on the tray. Tea. Lukewarm. He drank it anyway. Calories were calories. Energy was energy. He'd need both. The throne room at dawn was exactly what Theron expected. Vaulted ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Frost creeping up the stone columns in delicate, deadly spirals. No courtiers. No advisors. No witnesses. This meeting was private. A king didn't want his staff watching when the newest Omega gift failed to impress him. The throne was carved from black glass. Obsidian. Maybe. Something volcanic that caught the grey morning light and threw it back in fractured pieces. It looked less like a seat of power and more like a monument to something that had already died. And on it sat a man built entirely from distance and ice. Cormac Whitley was in his early 50s. Silver streaked his dark hair at the temples. His face was handsome in the way old mountains were handsome. Not soft. Not welcoming. Just ancient and immovable and worn down by forces that had been trying to break him for longer than most people had been alive. His eyes were the color of winter storms. They tracked Theron's entrance with the flat, assessing gaze of someone who'd stopped expecting good things from strangers approximately 15 years ago. 2 guards flanked Theron. They didn't touch him, some small mercy, but they walked close enough to make the threat clear. You're not a guest. You're a delivery. They stopped 10 feet from the throne. Theron didn't bow. Didn't soften his posture. Didn't lower his eyes. He met the king's gaze directly, the way he'd once met enemy commanders across negotiating tables. Equal to equal. Even when the body said otherwise. Something flickered in Cormac's expression. Too fast to name. You're the newest attempt, the king said. His voice was low and careful. Not cold. Exactly. More like someone testing the weight of a frozen lake before stepping onto it. They told me you were compliant. They lied. The throne room went very still. I'm not compliant, Theron continued, voice flat as a blade. I'm not a solution. And I'm not interested in whatever performance the last ones tried. If you want me gone, say it now. I've walked away from worse contracts. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, dense. The kind of silence that preceded violence or revelation, and no one in the room knew which was coming. 5 seconds passed. Theron counted them. Frost cracked audibly on the windows. Then Cormac Whitley did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He laughed. Short. Bitter. Surprising even himself, by the way his eyes widened slightly at the sound. It cracked the air between them like ice breaking on a river. The guards exchanged glances Theron couldn't interpret but filed away anyway. You're not afraid of me, Cormac said. Not a question. I'm not afraid of anything I can see. It's the things people hide that get you killed. Cormac leaned forward slightly. Just a fraction. But Theron saw it immediately. The flinch. Barely visible. A tightening around the eyes. A microcorrection in posture, like someone catching themselves before touching a hot surface. Leaning forward had hurt. Physically. The curse reacting to something as simple as curiosity. Theron filed that detail away. It joined the other observations. The king was in pain. Constant, low-level, ambient pain that flared whenever he allowed himself to feel something. That was useful intelligence. I'll give you 3 days, Cormac said finally. He settled back against the throne, and the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Distance was safer. Distance was what he knew. If you haven't tried to fix me, seduce me, or flee by then, we'll talk again. Theron considered this. 3 days. That was generous. It was also a test. Everything in this tower would be a test. He understood that now. The king had been burned too many times by Omegas who performed. 3 days would tell Cormac whether Theron's refusal to perform was genuine or just a different kind of act. Fine, Theron said. He turned and walked out without being dismissed. The guards scrambled to follow. Behind him, he felt the king's eyes on his back like a physical weight. Not hostile. Not hungry. Just watching. Theron spent the next 2 days avoiding the king, the court, and every attempt by servants to prepare him for another audience. He wasn't hiding. He was gathering intelligence. There was a difference. The tower was old. Older than the curse. Older than the kingdom, maybe. It had been built in layers. The bottom floors were functional, kitchens, guard barracks, servant quarters. The middle floors held the administrative offices and guest chambers. The top floors belonged to the king. And somewhere in between, buried like a secret the building itself was trying to protect, there was a library. Theron found it on the second day by following a servant who looked terrified to be carrying books to the king's private study. The servant veered left at a corridor Theron hadn't explored. Pushed open a door that groaned on centuries-old hinges. Disappeared inside for 8 minutes. Emerged empty-handed and even more nervous than before. Theron waited until the footsteps faded. Then he went in. The library was massive. 2 stories tall. Shelves spiraling up the walls in formations that made his tactical mind hum with appreciation. Books no one had read in decades. Scrolls no one remembered existed. And in the back corner, tucked behind a curtain of dust and neglect, a section devoted entirely to the curse. Theron pulled the first book he found. Then the second. Then a scroll written in a language he didn't recognize but could piece together from context. He sat on the cold stone floor with his back against a reading table and devoured information the way he'd once devoured enemy intelligence. If you'd like to support this channel, consider joining Patreon, where you'll also get access to exclusive and uncensored stories I can't post on YouTube. Fast. Focused. Filing every useful detail and discarding the rest. The curse had been cast 15 years ago by a rival mage named Aldrich Vane. Aldrich had been Cormac's childhood friend. His closest advisor. And then, after some incident the records danced around without naming, his bitterest enemy. The curse was designed with elegant cruelty. It bound itself to Cormac's emotional core, making every genuine feeling register as physical agony. Joy burned. Anger stabbed. Hope. The records were very clear on this. Hope nearly killed him. Twice. The original spell was supposed to fade after a year. Curses that strong couldn't sustain themselves indefinitely without an anchor. But this one hadn't faded. It had grown stronger. And the reason, buried in a footnote of a crumbling manuscript, made Theron's chest tighten in a way he refused to name. The anchor was Cormac himself. His own magic, twisted inward. He was holding the curse in place. Not consciously, maybe. Not deliberately. But somewhere deep in the architecture of the spell, the king's belief that he deserved to suffer had given the curse exactly what it needed to survive. Theron sat with that information for a long moment. The cold from the stone floor seeped through his thin clothes. The suppressor burn pulsed dully beneath his skin. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the tower walls like something trying to get in. Most Omegas don't read the court records. Theron didn't startle. He'd heard the footsteps 10 seconds ago. Light. Measured. The deliberate pace of someone who'd learned to move carefully through pain. He looked up slowly. Cormac stood in the doorway. No guards. No advisors. Just him. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was different from the throne room. Less guarded. More exhausted. Like someone who'd spent the day performing strength and had finally run out of the energy to maintain it. Most Omegas weren't mercenaries who survived by knowing what their employers were hiding, Theron replied. He didn't look back down at the book. He didn't stand. He just watched the king the way he'd once watched potential threats across crowded rooms. Carefully. Without judgment. Cormac crossed the room slowly. Every movement was controlled. Deliberate. Like a man walking on broken glass and trying not to let anyone see him bleed. When he reached the reading table, he stopped. Looked down at the scattered books and scrolls. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. You died, he said suddenly. Before you came here. I can see it in how you move. You're not afraid of death. Theron considered deflecting. It would have been easy. He'd spent a lifetime perfecting the art of giving people answers that sounded honest while revealing nothing. But something about the way Cormac was standing, the exhaustion, the careful distance, the way his hands stayed perfectly still at his sides like he was afraid of what they might do if he let them move, made deflection feel like cowardice. No. I'm afraid of dying badly. Of failing people who counted on me. Death itself. He shrugged. It was a small motion. Barely a movement at all. I've already done it once. It wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me. Cormac absorbed this. Then, very slowly, he sat down in the chair across from Theron. The movement cost him something. Theron could see it in the way his jaw tightened. The curse reacting to proximity. To attention. To the simple, dangerous act of allowing himself to be in the same space as another person who didn't feel like a threat. But he sat anyway. The curse responds to emotion, Cormac said quietly. His voice was different now. Not the flat, controlled tone from the throne room. Not the low warning from their first meeting. This was the voice of someone who hadn't spoken honestly in so long he'd forgotten what it felt like. Joy is agony. Anger is worse. Hope. He stopped. Swallowed. His hands tightened briefly against his thighs. Hope nearly killed me twice. So I stopped feeling it. Theron closed the book in his lap. That's not surviving. That's dying slowly. It's the only way I know how to keep my people safe. And there it was. The wound beneath the ice. Cormac wasn't suppressing his emotions because he was cold. He was suppressing them because he believed, with the absolute certainty of someone who'd spent 15 years proving it to himself, that caring about anything made it a weapon. That love was a liability. That the only way to protect anyone was to stop feeling anything at all. Theron knew that logic intimately. He'd lived it. He'd died by it. Standing in the snow, bleeding out, telling himself it was better this way. Better that he die alone. Better that no one be close enough to mourn him. It hadn't felt like wisdom when he'd been choking on his own blood. It had just felt like the end of a very long and very lonely road. The last mercenary crew I ran with, Theron said slowly, had a medic named Kieran. She was good. Better than good. She could put a man back together with half a suture kit and sheer stubbornness. And she had this habit of telling everyone she didn't care. Didn't get attached. Didn't feel anything when people died on her table. He paused. She was lying. Everyone knew she was lying. But she needed the lie because caring meant losing people, and she'd lost too many. So she built walls and called it strength. Cormac's expression flickered. What happened to her? She died 6 months before I did. Protecting a convoy of civilians. She didn't have to. She could have run. But when the moment came, she chose them over her own survival. And I think, Theron looked down at the book in his lap. The crumbling pages. The record of a curse that had been eating a man alive for 15 years because he didn't know how to stop punishing himself. I think she was finally ready to stop hiding from the thing that made her human. The silence that followed was heavy. Not uncomfortable. Just full. The way a room gets full before a storm. Cormac didn't speak. He didn't move. But he didn't leave either. He just sat there, across from Theron, breathing like it hurt and not trying to hide it anymore. Theron woke to burning. Not heat. Not yet. Something worse. The chemical burn of suppressors losing their grip on biology that was never meant to be restrained this way. It started in his chest and spread outward like fire following oil, lighting up nerve endings that had been dormant for weeks. His skin felt too tight. His heartbeat was wrong. And his scent. His scent was flooding the room. Not the soft, floral omega sweetness the court had expected when they'd purchased him. Not the honeyed undertone the suppressors had been masking. Something else. Something sharper. Steel and winter wind and the lingering smoke of campfires in hostile territory. The smell of a battlefield after the fighting stopped. The smell of someone who'd spent a lifetime walking away from things that wanted to kill him and refusing to die. Within minutes, there were footsteps outside his door. Theron forced himself upright. The room tilted. He grabbed the pitcher of water from the nightstand and poured it over his head without hesitation. Cold. Sharp. Clarity. It bought him 30 seconds of functional thought. He used them. 3 guards outside. Possibly more in the corridor. His scent was broadcasting omega vulnerability at full strength, which meant every alpha within range was going to feel it. Instinct would override protocol. He'd seen it happen before. Alphas who were disciplined and controlled in normal circumstances became unpredictable around an omega in distress. It wasn't malice. It was biology. But biology didn't care about consent, and Theron wasn't going to let his new body's chemistry make decisions for him. The door opened without permission. Bram Collier, the king's steward, stood in the doorway. Behind him, 2 guards. The steward was a beta. Theron had catalogued that on the first day, which meant he could stand in a room full of omega pheromones without his instincts hijacking his judgment. Smart. The king had chosen his staff carefully. The king has been notified, Bram said. His voice was tight, controlled, but his eyes moved over Theron's shaking form with something that wasn't quite concern and wasn't quite fear. You need to be moved to the Omega wing immediately before. Before what? The question cut him off. Theron's voice was steady even though his body was not. He'd learned a long time ago that the voice was a weapon. If you sounded like you were in control, people treated you like you were in control, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. Before I become what you paid for. Theron continued. Before my biology does what you've been trying to force it to do since I arrived, I'm not going anywhere. One of the guards stepped forward. Big. Alpha. His eyes were slightly glazed in the way Theron recognized immediately. The scent was getting to him, lowering his inhibitions, making him stupid. Theron moved. The body was wrong, weaker, smaller, slower than his old one. But the muscle memory was still there. The knowledge of where to strike. How to drop a man twice your size with minimal effort and maximum efficiency. He caught the guard's wrist as it reached for him, twisted, swept the legs. The guard hit the floor hard. Not injured. Just shocked. The kind of shock that came from being bested by someone you'd been told was helpless. The room went silent. I said I'm not going anywhere. Theron's voice didn't waver. Send for the king if he wants to discuss it. Otherwise, get out. They left. Bram's expression was unreadable as he pulled the door closed. The guard scrambled to his feet and retreated without meeting Theron's eyes. The footsteps faded down the corridor. The lock clicked. Theron leaned against the door and counted his breaths the way he'd once counted seconds between heartbeats in enemy territory. The heat was coming. He could feel it building at the edges of consciousness, slow and inexorable, like a tide he couldn't outrun. His body was going to try to drag him under. His biology was going to demand things his mind wasn't ready to give. And somewhere in the tower, the king was going to feel it. Feel him. And everything Theron had been trying to avoid would crash into everything Cormac had spent 15 years suppressing. He pushed off the door, crossed the room on shaking legs, sat on the floor with his back against the bed because it was the only position that didn't make the room spin. The heat was coming. He'd face it the way he'd faced everything else. Awake, armed with his mind, refusing to go down easy. An hour before dawn, the door opened again. Theron heard the key turn. Heard the footsteps, one set, not multiple. Heard the pause as whoever it was crossed the threshold and stopped. He didn't look up. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the bed, sweating through his thin shirt, every muscle in his borrowed body trembling with the effort of holding still. But his voice, when he spoke, was steady. If you're here to mark me while I can't fight back, you'll lose more than a hand. Noted. Cormac's voice. Low. Rough at the edges. Theron looked up. The king stood 3 feet inside the door, and he wasn't moving closer. His posture was rigid. His hands were at his sides, curled into fists, the knuckles white with tension. His expression was controlled in the way of someone holding back something enormous. And his breathing, Theron could hear it from across the room, was ragged, pained. Like every inhale was a conscious choice. Your scent, Cormac said. His voice was barely above a whisper. It's not, he stopped. Swallowed. His jaw worked for a moment before he could continue. It doesn't hurt. Theron's eyes narrowed. What? Every omega they've sent. Their scent triggered the curse within seconds. Floral. Soft. Desperate. It felt like claws in my chest. Like being flayed from the inside. But you, Cormac's hands tightened further. The knuckles went from white to bloodless. You smell like a battlefield. Like snow and smoke and something I don't have a name for. And it doesn't hurt. Theron tried to process this. It was hard. The heat was building. Coherent thought was becoming difficult. But the tactical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through worse than this, latched onto the anomaly and refused to let go. The curse. It's not reacting to me. No. Why? I don't know. Cormac's voice cracked on the last word. I don't. I've been trying to understand it since you arrived. Every other omega made it worse. Every single one. But you walked into my throne room and refused to bow and looked at me like I was just another contract to evaluate. And it didn't hurt. It hasn't hurt since you got here. And I don't know why. Theron tried to stand. His legs buckled. Cormac moved without thinking. Crossed the room in 3 strides. Caught Theron before he hit the floor. The contact was electric, not romantic, not soft, but something far more dangerous. The moment Cormac's hands closed around Theron's arms, the alpha pheromones hit. 15 years of suppressed instinct. 15 years of control. All of it surging forward at once because an omega was in distress, and every cell in Cormac's body was screaming at him to do something about it. Theron felt it like a physical blow. His new body, omega body, reacted before his mind could intervene. Heat flared. Scent deepened. His fingers tightened against Cormac's chest without his permission. Let go, Theron gritted out. Cormac did. Immediately. He stepped back so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. The loss of contact was worse than the burning. Theron's body screamed at him to close the distance. His mind screamed at him to maintain it. He stayed where he was, shaking, sweating, furious at his own biology for wanting something his brain hadn't agreed to. I can't stay, Cormac said. His voice was breaking at the edges. Not the controlled king from the throne room. Not the exhausted man from the library. Something rawer. Someone who'd spent 15 years holding back and was running out of the strength to keep doing it. If I stay, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Then go. The words came out harder than Theron intended. But maybe that was good. Maybe hardness was what they both needed right now. Softness would break them. Gentleness would destroy the careful distance they'd been building between them. And Theron couldn't afford to be broken. Not now. Not when his body was a traitor and his instincts were a liability, and the only person in this tower who didn't make the curse worse was standing 3 feet away looking at him like he was something worth staying for. "I don't need you to save me," Theron said. The words were knives. He made them that way deliberately. "I never have." Cormac flinched. Then he turned, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame, not looking back. His shoulders were shaking. So were Theron's. Neither of them acknowledged it. "I'll send a physician," Cormac said. His voice was barely audible. "Someone who can help without making it worse." "Fine." Cormac left. The door locked behind him, and Theron was alone with a heat that felt like it was going to burn him from the inside out, and the terrible, unshakable knowledge that he'd just pushed away the only person in this kingdom who'd ever looked at him without wanting something. He didn't call Cormac back. The one thing worse than this pain would be asking for help when he couldn't trust whether his body or his mind was doing the asking. 2 days later, Theron woke in a bed that wasn't his. The ceiling was different. Lower. Warmer. Sconces on the walls instead of that narrow frost-rimmed window. The smell of medicinal herbs. The crisp, clean scent of linen that had been changed recently. And pain. Not the burning of suppressant failure or the consuming fire of heat. Just exhaustion. Bone deep. The kind of tired that came from surviving something that should have killed you. He turned his head. The room was small but comfortable. Physician's quarters, by the look of it. Shelves of bottles and jars. A basin of water. A chair pulled up beside the bed with a blanket draped over the arm. As if someone had been sitting there for a long time and had only recently stepped away. "You're awake." Theron's eyes tracked to the voice. An older woman stood in the doorway. Beta. Grey hair pulled back in a practical knot. Sharp eyes that assessed him without judgment. She was holding a cup of something that steamed faintly in the cool air. "The king hasn't left the hall outside this room since they brought you in," she said. Her tone was carefully neutral. The kind of neutral that meant she had opinions but was too professional to voice them. Theron processed this. His throat was dry. His voice, when he found it, came out rougher than he wanted. "Tell him to go do his job. I'm not dying." A faint smile tugged at the corner of the woman's mouth. "He knows you're not dying. That's not why he's out there." "What's your name?" "Myra. I'm the palace physician. You've been unconscious for 36 hours. The heat broke on its own, which is remarkable given the state your body was in when it started. You should be dead." "I get that a lot." Myra crossed the room and set the cup on the bedside table. "Drink. It's not tea. Tastes worse. But it'll help with the muscle recovery." Theron didn't reach for it. He stayed. "After you told him to leave?" Theron said nothing. "He did leave," Myra said. "For about 20 minutes. Then he came back and hasn't moved since. Bram's been bringing him meals he doesn't eat. The council's been sending messages he doesn't answer. I've been telling him to sleep, but," she shrugged. "Kings don't take orders from physicians." Theron closed his eyes. The exhaustion was still there. So was something else. Something softer. More dangerous. The image of Cormac sitting in a corridor for 36 hours, waiting to see if the Omega who'd told him to leave would survive the night. "I didn't ask him to stay," Theron said quietly. "No. You told him to leave. He did. And then he came back." Myra paused. "Men like him don't do that. Not for anyone. I've served this palace for 20 years, and I've never seen him sit outside anyone's door. Not once." The door opened. Not Cormac. Bram Collier, the steward, carrying a tray of food and a folded piece of paper. His expression was unreadable as always, but there was something different in the way he looked at Theron now. Not hostility. Not warmth. Something in between. Assessment. Maybe. Reevaluation. "From the king," Bram said, setting the tray down and holding out the paper. "He said you'd be hungry, and you'd refuse to ask." Theron took the paper. Unfolded it. The handwriting was surprisingly neat. Controlled. Like everything else about Cormac. "You survived. I'm not surprised." "See." Theron read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it under the pillow where no one, not Myra, not Bram, not any of the guards still lurking in the corridor, could see his hand shaking. He ate every bite of the food. Because spite was a better fuel than pride. Because refusing to eat would be spitting on a gesture that had cost Cormac something to make. And because somewhere beneath the fury and the fear and the bone-deep exhaustion, a small, treacherous part of him was glad the king had stayed. He didn't name that part. Naming things made them real. And Theron wasn't ready for that yet. For the next week, Theron avoided Cormac. And Cormac let him. It wasn't avoidance in the traditional sense. They occupied the same tower, passed through the same corridors, ate meals prepared by the same kitchens, but they moved through the spaces like two planets orbiting the same star, always aware of each other's gravity, never close enough to collide. Theron used the time to recover. His body, this strange, borrowed body, was stronger than it looked. Myra's treatments helped. So did the food Bram kept sending, even when Theron didn't ask for it. He started walking the tower's corridors at odd hours, mapping the layout, identifying exits and blind spots and places where an ambush might come from. Old habits. The kind that didn't die just because the body had changed. And he thought. He thought about the curse. About Cormac's hands shaking when he'd admitted that hope nearly killed him. About the way the king had caught him before he fell, and let go the moment Theron asked, even though every alpha instinct in his body must have been screaming at him to do the opposite. He thought about the note, still folded beneath his pillow. You survived. I'm not surprised. No one had ever expected him to survive before. No one had ever been unsurprised when he did. It shouldn't have mattered. It was just ink on paper. Just words. Words were cheap. Words were weapons people used to get what they wanted. Theron knew that better than most. But Cormac hadn't asked for anything. Hadn't demanded gratitude. Hadn't used the note as leverage. He'd just written it. Left it. Waited in a corridor for 36 hours for an Omega who'd told him to leave. And that, more than anything else, was what made Theron afraid. Because if Cormac was genuine, if he truly didn't want anything except Theron's continued existence, then Theron's walls were the only thing keeping them apart. And those walls had been built for a world where everyone wanted something, where kindness was always transactional, where the only person you could trust was yourself. If Cormac was different, if his curse made genuine connection impossible but he was still trying to connect anyway, then what excuse did Theron have? He didn't have an answer. So he kept avoiding Cormac. And Cormac kept letting him. And the tower stayed quiet, and the frost stayed on the windows, and somewhere in the space between two people who'd spent their entire lives building walls, something was shifting. Neither of them was ready to name it yet. The summons came on a grey morning, 1 week after Theron woke in Myra's infirmary. He had known it was coming. Not because anyone told him. Because he'd spent enough time in hostile territories to recognize the rhythm of a place preparing to strike. Servants avoiding his eyes. Guards stationed at corridor intersections they'd never guarded before. Bram Collier's neutral expression becoming even more carefully blank whenever Theron passed him in the halls. Something was brewing. Something political. The guard who delivered the summons didn't meet his eyes. The King's Council requests your presence. Immediately. Requests, Theron repeated flatly. Or demands. The guard said nothing. That was answer enough. Theron followed him through corridors he'd mapped days ago. Down the spiral stair. Past the guards' barracks. Through a set of heavy oak doors that led to a part of the tower he'd never been allowed to enter before. The council chamber was designed to intimidate. High ceilings. Dark wood. Windows that let in just enough light to see the faces of the men seated around the table, but not enough to feel welcoming. 8 nobles. All alpha. All watching him with the particular expression of predators who hadn't decided yet whether he was prey or obstacle. Cormac sat at the head of the table. Theron's eyes found him immediately. The king looked exhausted. Not physically. His posture was as rigid as ever, his expression as controlled. But there was something beneath the surface. A tension. A warning. As if he already knew what was about to happen and was bracing himself for it. Ah! The Omega arrives. The voice came from a man seated to the king's right. Late 40s. Expensive clothes. A face that had never known hunger or hardship but had spent decades perfecting the expression of casual cruelty. Theron catalogued him instantly. Vance Terrell. Master of coin. Duke. Political viper. The kind of man who'd smile while sliding a knife between your ribs and then complain about the blood on his sleeve. We were just discussing you, Vance continued. His tone was pleasant. It didn't match his eyes. Please, join us. There was no empty chair at the table. The message was deliberate. You don't belong here. You don't have a seat. You're not one of us. Theron didn't look for one. He walked to the center of the room and stopped. Standing. Not kneeling. Not bowing. Just standing, with his shoulders back and his eyes level. The way he'd once stood before warlords and crime bosses and people far more dangerous than 8 pampered nobles in a cold stone room. I'm here, he said. What do you want? Vance's smile flickered. Direct. I was told you were unusual. The reports didn't lie. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Let me be direct in return. The Omega situation has become untenable. The king's curse remains unbroken. The kingdom's wards continue to decay. And our political rivals are beginning to notice that the crown's latest acquisition has failed to produce results. I wasn't acquired to produce results. I was acquired to survive proximity to a cursed king. I've done that. Survival is not success. Vance's voice sharpened. You've been here for weeks. The curse remains. The king remains isolated. And now rumors are spreading about an Omega who refuses to perform his duties, who refuses to submit to marking, who refuses to even, he paused, letting the silence stretch, present himself as an Omega should. The other nobles shifted. Some uncomfortable. Some eager. All watching. If the king won't mark you, Vance continued, you have no legal standing in this court. No protection. No clan affiliation. You're a purchased asset that hasn't delivered value, and I'm here to propose we return you to your family with compensation and seek a more suitable candidate. The words landed like stones in still water. Theron felt them hit. Not the threat. He'd been threatened by better men than Vance Terrell. But the casual dismissal. The reduction of his existence to a failed transaction. The assumption that he could be returned like defective merchandise, and that whoever was waiting on the other end would simply accept the refund and move on. I don't have a family to return to, Theron said. His voice was flat. Dangerously flat. The kind of flat that preceded violence in his old life. They sold me because I was worth more as a commodity than a son. If you're looking for someone to humiliate, Lord Terrell, pick a target that will actually feel shame. I stopped feeling that the day I woke up in a body purchased like livestock. The room went very quiet. Vance's smile didn't waver, but something behind it hardened. You forget your place. I don't have a place. Theron cut him off like a blade through silk. That's the problem you're all struggling with. I wasn't bought to be compliant. I wasn't bought to be grateful. I wasn't bought to perform submission for an audience of men who've never earned it. I was bought to survive proximity to a cursed king. I've done that. I will keep doing that. And if my presence bothers you, Lord Terrell, I'd suggest you spend less time in rooms I'm occupying. Another noble spoke. Younger. Emboldened by Vance's example or too stupid to recognize danger. The king hasn't marked you. By law, that means you have no legal protection in this court, no claim to sanctuary, and no right to refuse any order given to you by a ranking alpha. You're not a guest. You're not a consort. You're property that hasn't been claimed, and unclaimed property can be disposed of however the council sees fit. The word hit. Property. Theron had been called many things in 2 lifetimes. Blade for hire. Mercenary. Killer. Traitor to the people who'd tried to buy his loyalty. But property, the casual reduction of his entire existence to something that could be owned and discarded, that was new. That was this body. This designation. This world's way of telling him that no matter what he'd done in his first life, no matter who he'd saved or what he'd sacrificed, He would always be reduced to his biology the moment someone decided he was inconvenient. Something cold settled in Theron's chest. Not anger. Not fear. Something older. The part of him that had once burned a slaver's compound to the ground because some people didn't deserve the air they breathed. He opened his mouth to respond. Enough. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Cormac's voice cut through the room like a blade through water. Every head turned. Every mouth closed. Even Vance, who'd been leaning forward with the eager posture of a man enjoying his own cruelty, settled back in his chair. The king stood. Slowly. Deliberately. His hands were steady at his sides. His face was calm. But his eyes were the color of winter storms about to break. Theron Ashford, Cormac said, and the name landed in the silence like a declaration, is under my protection. Marked or not. Contracted or not. Bonded or not. He answers to no one in this room except me. Vance's expression flickered. Your Majesty, I was merely. If any of you have a problem with that, Cormac continued, as if Vance hadn't spoken, you're welcome to bring it to me. Privately. I have 15 years of suppressed emotion to work through, and I would very much enjoy having a target for it. Silence. Absolute. Complete. The kind of silence that came after a door had been slammed shut and everyone in the room was waiting to see who'd lost fingers. Vance's face went very pale. That's not. I wasn't threatening. This meeting is over. The nobles filed out. Some quickly. Some reluctantly. Vance was the last to leave, and the look he shot Theron on his way out was not the look of a man who'd accepted defeat. It was the look of a man who was recalculating, adjusting his strategy, filing away information for later use. Theron recognized that look. He'd seen it on enemies before. The ones who didn't retreat. They just regrouped. The doors closed. Theron and Cormac were alone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The council chamber, which had felt cold before, now felt frozen. The kind of frozen that came from something unsaid sitting between two people like a third presence. Cormac didn't look at Theron. He was staring at the door the nobles had exited through, his jaw tight, his hands still curled into fists at his sides. The control was back. The mask was back. But it was cracked now. Theron could see the fractures. Could see the man underneath, shaking with something that might have been rage or might have been terror. You didn't have to do that, Theron said quietly. Yes, I did. I could have handled them. I know. Cormac finally turned. His eyes met Theron's, and the exhaustion in them was bone deep. But you shouldn't have to. Not here. Not in my court. Not when the only reason you're a target is because he stopped. Swallowed. His voice roughened. Because I care about what happens to you. The words hung in the air between them. Theron felt them land somewhere in his chest. Somewhere soft. Somewhere he'd been trying to protect since the moment he woke up in this borrowed body. Why? He asked. Cormac blinked. What? Why do you care? I'm not compliant. I'm not grateful. I'm not, he gestured vaguely at himself. The Omega body. The borrowed skin. The presence that was supposed to be a solution and had turned out to be just another problem. I'm not what you paid for. No. Cormac's voice softened. You're not. He stepped closer. Not threatening. Not crowding. Just closer. You're the first person in 15 years who looked at me and didn't see a tragedy to fix or a monster to fear. You saw a contract. A tactical situation. A problem to be assessed and managed. Do you have any idea how long it's been since someone treated me like I was just a man instead of a curse wearing a crown? Theron said nothing. Because what was there to say? You don't perform, Cormac continued. You don't pretend. You don't try to soothe me or seduce me or save me from myself. You just exist. In the same space. Without demanding anything. Without expecting anything. And the curse? His voice cracked slightly. The curse doesn't hurt when you're near. It hasn't hurt since the day you arrived. Do you understand what that means? 15 years of agony, and you walk into my throne room and tell me you're not a solution, and somehow that's exactly what makes you one. Theron's throat was tight. He didn't know what to do with any of this. Praise made him suspicious. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. But this wasn't either of those things. This was someone standing in front of him and saying, "You, exactly as you are, without changing anything, without performing anything, without being anything other than what you are, you matter." He didn't know how to respond to that. So he didn't. He just stood there, in the cold council chamber, with the king who defended him publicly and the silence that was no longer empty but full, too full, of words neither of them knew how to say. Theron tracked Cormac down deliberately that night. It was the first time he'd sought the king out instead of waiting to be summoned. It felt strange, vulnerable in a way that made his skin itch. But the council meeting had shifted something. The way Cormac had defended him. The way his voice had cracked when he said he cared. The way he'd looked at Theron afterward, like he was waiting for rejection and trying to brace himself for it. Theron knew that look. He'd worn it himself. In another life. In another body. Standing in the snow, telling himself it was better to die alone than to let anyone close enough to mourn him. The library was dark when he found it. Not completely. A single candle burned on the reading table where they'd sat together days ago. Cormac was standing at the window, his back to the door, his silhouette framed by moonlight and frost. Theron closed the door behind him. "You should hate me." Cormac didn't turn. "Why?" "Because I didn't stop them from summoning you to that room. Because I let them treat you like a thing to be debated. Because every day you're here, you're in danger, and I'm the reason." Theron crossed the room. Stopped beside him. Not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt deliberate. "You defended me. After letting them speak first." Cormac's voice was bitter. "After letting them. You can't stop people from being cruel." Theron interrupted. "You can only decide what you do after." You stood up. That's more than most kings would do for someone they didn't have to care about. Cormac finally turned. His face was unguarded in a way Theron had never seen. The mask was gone. The control was gone. What was left was just a man. Exhausted. Frightened. Holding himself together with sheer stubbornness. "That's the problem," Cormac said quietly. "I do care." And caring, he stopped. Visibly fighting something internal. His hands were shaking again. "The curse is weakening. Around you, it's been weakening since the day you arrived. My court mage confirmed it yesterday." Theron went very still. "That's good." "No." Cormac's voice was raw. "It's not. Because if the curse fully breaks, I'll feel everything I've been holding back for 15 years all at once. Every suppressed emotion. Every buried grief. Every moment of hope I strangled before it could kill me. It'll all hit at the same time, and I don't." He stopped. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know if I'll survive it. And you'll be standing right there when it happens." The silence that followed was heavy. The weight of 15 years of pain, compressed into a single moment of confession. Theron absorbed it. All of it. The fear. The exhaustion. The terrible calculus of a man who'd been told that the only way to survive was to feel nothing, and who was now being told that the only way to heal was to feel everything. Then he said the most dangerous thing he'd said since arriving in this world. "Then I'll catch you." Cormac stared at him like he'd spoken a language that didn't exist. "You caught me," Theron said quietly. "When the heat broke me, you caught me even though it cost you. Even though I told you to leave. You stayed outside that door for 36 hours. I know. Myra told me." He paused. His own voice roughened. "If the curse breaks you, I'll do the same. That's what people do when they..." He stopped. "Recalibrated. When they don't want to be alone anymore." Cormac reached out. Slowly. So slowly. His hand hovered an inch from Theron's face, not quite touching. Close enough to feel warmth. Close enough to feel the tremble in his fingers. "I don't know how to let someone stay," Cormac whispered. "I don't know how to stop leaving." Theron's voice was barely audible. "But I'm still here." Cormac's hand dropped. But he didn't step back. Neither did Theron. They stood there, in the candlelit library, with the frost on the windows and the weight of 2 broken histories between them, and the space was no longer empty. It was full of something neither of them had a name for yet. The court mage's workshop was buried deep in the palace, in a part of the tower Theron hadn't explored. It smelled of old parchment and strange chemicals. Glass orbs hung from the ceiling, catching light and throwing it in fractured patterns across the walls. Scrolls written in languages Theron didn't recognize were stacked on every surface. Iris was ancient. Not old, ancient. She'd served 3 kings before Cormac, and her eyes held the particular weight of someone who'd watched empires rise and fall and had stopped being surprised by either. When she summoned them both with a message that said only, "I know why the curse is breaking," neither Theron nor Cormac hesitated. Now they stood in her workshop, shoulder to shoulder, waiting. The curse was designed to activate on genuine emotion, Iris said. She didn't bother with preamble. Joy, hope, love, anything real. It was brilliant and cruel because it ensured King Cormac would hollow himself out to survive. The more he felt, the more he suffered. The less he felt, the longer he lived. It was a slow execution dressed up as a curse. "We know this," Cormac said. His voice was tight. Impatient. Afraid. "What you don't know," Iris continued, unperturbed, "is that the curse has a failsafe. Aldrich Vane was many things, vindictive, bitter, consumed by a grudge that rotted him from the inside, but he was not stupid. He knew that no curse lasts forever without an anchor. So he built one into the design. The curse sustains itself by feeding on the king's suppressed emotions. Every time Cormac feels something and forces it down, the curse grows stronger. It's a parasite that creates its own food source. Theron's eyes narrowed. That doesn't explain why it's weakening. I'm getting there. Iris fixed him with a look that made him feel approximately 12 years old. The failsafe is this: if the afflicted party ever encounters someone whose presence creates calm instead of chaos, someone whose existence doesn't demand emotional response but allows it, the curse begins to cannibalize itself. The words landed like stones in still water. It means you don't trigger the king's emotions, Iris said, looking directly at Theron. You give him space to feel them at his own pace. Every other Omega sent here performed. They wept. They seduced. They demanded care and comfort and attention. Every single one of them triggered the curse because they were asking something of him. You, she paused. You simply existed and set boundaries. That neutrality is what's killing the curse. Cormac sat down hard in the nearest chair. His legs had stopped working. His face was pale. So if he leaves, the curse will stabilize again. Not heal. Stabilize. You'll go back to survival, and the kingdom's wards, which are tied to your magic, will continue to decay. Eventually, the wards will fail completely, and this kingdom will be defenseless against whatever comes next. Theron felt the trap snap shut around both of them. And if I stay, the curse will break completely within the month. Iris's voice was calm, clinical, the voice of someone delivering a prognosis she knew would devastate. And the king will experience 15 years of suppressed emotion in a single cascade. Every moment of joy he strangled. Every hope he crushed before it could blossom. Every grief he refused to mourn. It will hit him all at once, and the sheer force of it, she paused. Her eyes moved to Cormac. It could kill him. Silence. Or, Iris added, it could free him. I don't know which. No one has ever gotten this far before. The other Omegas all failed within days. You've been here for weeks, and the curse is unraveling faster than I can track. I don't know what happens next. Neither do you. Neither does anyone. Cormac's breathing was ragged. Theron could hear it from 3 feet away. If I leave, Theron said slowly, he lives. But he stays cursed. The wards keep failing. The kingdom stays vulnerable. Yes. If I stay, the curse breaks. But the breaking might kill him. Yes. And there's no third option. No. Iris looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. Might have been respect. There isn't. Theron turned to look at Cormac. The king was still sitting in that chair, his hands gripping the armrests, his knuckles white. His face was a mask of controlled terror. Not for himself, Theron realized with a jolt, but for what he might be about to ask. For what Theron might be about to lose. Theron, Cormac said. His voice was steady. Barely. Whatever you decide. Don't. The word came out sharper than Theron intended. Don't give me an out. Don't tell me I can leave and you won't hold it against me. Don't try to protect me from a choice that isn't yours to make. Cormac's mouth closed. Theron looked at Iris. How long? A month. Maybe less. The curse is degrading faster now that we understand the mechanism. Your presence is the catalyst. The more time you spend near him, the faster it breaks. Then I'll stay. The words left Theron's mouth before he'd consciously decided to say them. But the moment they were out, he knew they were true. Had been true for weeks, maybe. Had been true since the moment Cormac laughed in that throne room, cracking the ice between them. Cormac stood. Theron. I said don't. Theron turned to face him fully. I've spent 2 lifetimes walking away from things before they could hurt me. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of choosing survival over connection. I'm tired of telling myself that being alone is the same as being safe. His voice dropped. You're the first person who's ever looked at me like I mattered. Not because I was useful. Not because I was a solution. Just because I was there. So yes, I'm staying. And if the curse breaks you, I'll be there for that, too. Cormac stared at him. His eyes were wet. He wasn't trying to hide it anymore. I don't know how to let you do this, he whispered. You don't have to let me. I'm doing it anyway. That's how choices work. A laugh startled out of Cormac. Broken. Wet. Surprising even himself. You're impossible. I've been told. Iris watched them both with the expression of someone who'd seen a great many things in her long life and was quietly pleased to add this to the list. I'll prepare what I can. Breaking a curse of this magnitude will require stabilization spells. Pain management. A space that's warded against magical backlash. She paused. And you'll need to be together when it happens. The curse feeds on isolation. Breaking it will require proximity. Theron nodded. He didn't look away from Cormac. We'll be ready, he said. And for the first time since waking in this borrowed body, he meant it. The night the curse broke, Theron woke to the sound of shattering glass. He was out of bed and through the connecting door before his conscious mind caught up with his body. The room beyond was chaos. The windows had blown inward. Frost coated every surface, thick and crystalline and wrong. The air vibrated with magic coming undone. A pressure that made his ears ring and his teeth ache. And in the center of the wreckage, on his knees in a circle of broken mirrors, was Cormac. The king was shaking. Not the controlled trembling of someone holding back. The violent, uncontrollable shaking of someone whose body was experiencing 15 years of suppressed emotion all at once. Joy, grief, rage, hope, all of it hitting at the same time. A tidal wave of feeling that had been dammed up for a decade and a half and was now tearing through every wall Cormac had ever built. His hands were bleeding. He'd shattered the mirrors himself. Theron understood why immediately. The curse had used reflections. Mirrors. Glass surfaces. Anywhere Cormac could see himself, the curse could see him, too. Breaking them was instinct. Survival. The first act of a man who decided to live even if it killed him. Theron crossed the room without hesitation. Broken glass crunched under his bare feet. He didn't feel it. Would feel it later, probably. Would sit in Myra's infirmary while she picked shards out of his souls and called him an idiot in that flat, professional voice of hers. None of that mattered now. He dropped to his knees in front of Cormac and pulled the king into his arms. I've got you, Theron said. His voice was steady. The voice he'd used on battlefields. The voice he'd used with dying soldiers and terrified civilians and people who needed someone to be calm when the world was ending. I've got you. You're not alone. Stay with me. Cormac's hands fisted in Theron's shirt. His whole body was convulsing. The magic was a visible thing now. crackling across his skin like lightning looking for somewhere to ground. It burned where it touched Theron. He didn't let go. It hurts. Cormac's voice was barely recognizable. Raw. Torn. God, it hurts. But I can feel. I know. Theron held tighter. I know. Stay with me. You're not doing this alone. The magic reached a crescendo. Light flooded the room. White. Blinding. The walls shook. The frost on the windows cracked and splintered and fell away. And Theron felt something inside his own body respond. Not heat, not the desperate consuming fire of Omega biology, but something deeper. Something older. His scent flooded the space. Steel and smoke and winter. The smell of someone who'd spent a lifetime surviving things that should have killed him. And Cormac's magic recognized it. Locked onto it. Began to stabilize. The breaking didn't stop. The flood of emotion didn't slow. But the violence of it eased. The shattering became shaking. The shaking became trembling. The trembling became something closer to breathing. And through all of it, Theron held on. Arms locked around Cormac's shoulders. Face pressed against his hair. Voice steady in his ear. I've got you. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Minutes passed. Or hours. Theron lost track. The light faded. The magic settled. The frost stopped spreading and began to melt, water running down the walls in slow silver lines. And finally, Cormac went still. Not the stillness of control. Not the stillness of suppression. The stillness of something that had been wound too tight for too long and had finally, impossibly, released. He pulled back just enough to look at Theron's face. His eyes were red-rimmed. Wet. More alive than Theron had ever seen them. You stayed, Cormac whispered. Like he still couldn't believe it. Like he'd spent 15 years expecting everyone to leave and was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I told you I would. Theron's voice was rough. His throat was tight. His eyes were burning and he refused to acknowledge it. I don't break promises. Cormac kissed him. Not desperately. Not with heat. Not with the consuming fire of biology or instinct or any of the things Theron had been taught to fear from alphas. Just relief. The kind of kiss that came after surviving something you were certain would kill you. Gentle. Trembling. A question and an answer all at once. Theron kissed him back. The broken glass was still on the floor. Their hands were still bleeding. The room was still a wreck of shattered mirrors and melted frost and the aftermath of magic that had nearly torn a man apart. None of it mattered. When they finally pulled apart, Cormac's forehead pressed against Theron's. Their breath mingling in the cold air, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The next few weeks were quiet. Not the tense, watchful quiet of the tower before the curse broke. Something different. The quiet of healing. Of recovery. Of two people learning how to exist in the same space without walls between them. Cormac slept. Really slept. For the first time in 15 years, his dreams weren't haunted by the curse. Myra said it would take months for his body to fully recover from the sustained damage. Years, maybe, for the psychological scars to fade. But the curse was gone. Iris confirmed it 3 times, each time with more disbelief than the last. The magic that had bound itself to Cormac's emotional core had unraveled completely, leaving behind nothing but the ordinary, terrifying vulnerability of being human. Theron stayed. Not because he was trapped. Not because of heat or bond or obligation. Because when he looked at Cormac, at this man who'd spent 15 years believing he was unlovable, who'd hollowed himself out to protect a kingdom that didn't know the cost, who'd held Theron through the worst heat of his life and then let go the moment Theron asked, he didn't see a curse or a tragedy or a problem to be solved. He saw someone worth staying for. It terrified him. He'd spent 2 lifetimes perfecting the art of leaving. Walking away before anyone could walk away from him. Dying alone because it was easier than letting someone else carry the weight of losing him. He'd told himself it was strength. Self-sufficiency. The noble isolation of a blade for hire who didn't need anyone. It had been cowardice. He saw that now. Protection without connection was just another form of running. You're thinking too loudly, Cormac said one evening. They were sitting in the library, their library now, the one where Theron had first read about the curse and Cormac had first sat down across from him like it cost him something. The windows were open. Spring was finally beginning to creep across the kingdom. Frost still clung to the shadows, but the sun was warm. Am I? You have a face. Cormac's voice was dry. It does things when you think. I've been cataloguing them. Theron raised an eyebrow. Cataloguing. 15 years of suppressed observation. I'm catching up. Cormac paused. His expression shifted. Not guarded, exactly, but careful. The way someone looked before saying something that mattered. I want to ask you something. And I need you to say no if the answer is no. That's a hell of a preamble. Cormac reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Simple. Dark wood. Unadorned. His hands were steady as he opened it, but Theron could see the tension in his shoulders. The weight of what he was about to offer. Inside was a bonding band. Traditional design. Silver. A single stone set into the metal that caught the light and held it. I'm not asking you to accept a mark, Cormac said. His voice was quiet. Steady. The voice of someone who'd spent weeks rehearsing this moment and still wasn't sure he'd get the words right. I know what marking means to you. I know what it would cost. And I'm not going to ask you to give me something you're not ready to give. This, he touched the band lightly. This is a promise. Not a claim. A promise that I'll never make a choice about your life without you. That you're not an obligation or a political tool or a solution to a problem. That you're... He stopped. Recalibrated. That you're the person I choose. Every day. Consciously. Deliberately. Not because of biology or fate or some cosmic design. Because you walked into my throne room and refused to bow, and I laughed for the first time in 15 years, and it didn't hurt. His voice roughened. Because you stayed. When staying could have killed you. When staying meant watching me fall apart and holding on anyway. You stayed. And if you'll let me, he held out the box. I want to stay, too. For as long as you'll have me. Theron looked at the band. Then at Cormac. Then at the band again. His chest was tight. His eyes were burning. He was not going to cry. He'd survived 2 deaths, 1 heat, and a magical curse breaking. He was not going to cry over a silver band and a man who looked at him like he was something precious. He held out his hand. Cormac's breath caught. Theron. Put it on before I change my mind. Cormac's hands were shaking as he slid the band onto Theron's finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Cormac had probably measured his finger while he was sleeping. The man was a strategist. He didn't leave anything to chance. Theron looked down at the band. Silver. Simple. His. I spent 2 lifetimes refusing to let anyone close enough to matter, he said quietly. His voice was rougher than he wanted it to be. I told myself it was strength. Self-sufficiency. The noble isolation of a blade for hire who didn't need anyone. But it wasn't. It was fear. I was afraid of losing people. So I left before they could leave me. I died thinking that was the only way to protect anyone. And then I woke up here, in a body I didn't choose, in a world that wanted to use me, and you, he looked up. Met Cormac's eyes. You were the first person who didn't expect me to be anything other than what I am. You defended me. You caught me when I fell. You let me go when I asked you to. You stayed outside my door for 36 hours because you were afraid I'd die alone and you wanted to be there if I didn't. Cormac's eyes were wet. He wasn't hiding it. So yeah, I'll wear the band. But if you ever try to make a decision for me again, if you ever try to protect me by taking away my choice, I'm keeping the band and selling your throne. Cormac laughed. It was the freest sound Theron had ever heard from him. Not controlled. Not measured. Just genuine. The laugh of someone who'd forgotten what joy felt like and was rediscovering it in real time. Deal, Cormac said. He pulled Theron into his arms. Theron went willingly. The band glinted on his finger, catching the last of the sunset light through the window. Outside, spring was creeping across the kingdom. Inside, 2 two people who'd spent their entire lives building walls were finally learning how to live without them. It wasn't perfect. They still argued. Theron still woke up some nights reaching for a sword that wasn't there. Cormac still flinched sometimes when emotions hit too hard, his body remembering pain that was no longer real. They were both scarred, both damaged, both carrying the weight of histories that would never fully heal. But they were carrying it together. 2 months later, Theron stood in the palace gardens and watched the sun rise. The gardens had been dead when he arrived. Frozen. Withered. A reflection of the curse that had been eating the kingdom from the inside. Now they were blooming. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But flowers were pushing through the thawed soil. The trees were budding. The fountains were running clear for the first time in 15 years. Cormac was beside him. Shoulder to shoulder. Not touching, but close enough. I used to come here before the curse, Cormac said quietly. Every morning. It was the only time I could be alone. No advisors. No counsel. No one demanding anything. He paused. I stopped coming after Aldrich cursed me. Being alone felt too much like being trapped. And now? Cormac turned to look at him. The morning light caught his face, softening the lines that 15 years of pain had carved into it. Now I don't want to be alone at all. Which is inconvenient, because you're a very independent person and I'm trying to respect your boundaries. Theron snorted. You're doing a terrible job. I know. I'm still here. I know. Cormac's voice softened. I still don't understand why. Theron turned to face him fully. The bonding band was warm on his finger. He'd stopped noticing it consciously weeks ago, but he was always aware of it on some level. The weight. The promise. The choice it represented. Because you're the first person in 2 lifetimes who ever looked at me and saw someone worth choosing, Theron said. Not because I was useful. Not because I was a solution. Not because I fit into some role you needed filled. Just because I was there. Just because you liked who I was when I wasn't performing. He paused. His voice dropped. Do you know how rare that is? To be chosen without being used? To be wanted without being consumed? Cormac's hand found his. Their fingers interlaced. The silver band caught the light. I know, Cormac said. Because you gave me the same thing. You looked at me and didn't see a curse. Didn't see a tragic king who needed saving. You saw a man. Just a man. And you stayed anyway. I didn't stay anyway. I stayed because of it. The words hung in the air between them. True. Simple. The kind of truth that didn't need embellishment. Theron looked up at the sky. Clear. Blue. The kind of sky that promised spring and meant it. Somewhere in the distance, the kingdom was waking up. Wards that had been failing for 15 years were humming with renewed magic. Crops that had struggled in frozen soil were beginning to grow. People who'd lived under the shadow of a dying king were starting to believe that the shadow had passed. He thought about his first life. The mercenary crew he'd lost. The refugees he'd saved. The snow he'd bled out in. Telling himself it was better this way. Better to die alone. Better that no one be close enough to mourn him. He'd been wrong. He saw that now. Dying alone wasn't noble. It was just lonely. And surviving alone wasn't strength. It was just survival. The bare minimum of existence. Not living. Just not dying. Thank you, he said quietly. Cormac blinked. For what? For not giving up. Theron's voice was steady. For staying outside that door. For defending me in front of your council. For asking instead of assuming. For, he stopped. Swallowed. For making me believe that staying was worth the risk. Cormac squeezed his hand. You did the same for me. You could have left. You should have left. Every tactical instinct you have must have been screaming at you to leave. But you stayed. I stayed because you were worth the risk. And you were worth the curse. Worth the pain. Worth every moment of terror I felt when I realized I was starting to hope again. Cormac's voice cracked slightly. You were worth all of it. They stood there in the garden as the sun climbed higher. The frost on the stone walls was melting. The The flowers were opening. The world was waking up. And for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them was running. Theron looked at the man beside him, this king who'd been broken and rebuilt, who'd spent 15 years believing he was unlovable, who'd held him through heat and curse and fear and never once asked for more than Theron was willing to give, and felt something settle in his chest. Not the frantic, consuming fire of biology. Not the desperate urgency of heat. Something quieter. Something steadier. Peace. He'd spent 2 lifetimes chasing it. Fighting for it. Dying for it. And it had been here all along. Not in solitude. Not in isolation. In the hand of someone who'd chosen him and kept choosing him, every single day, without asking him to be anything other than exactly what he was. Theron Ashford had died a blade for hire. He'd woken up as an unwanted Omega. And somehow, impossibly, against every instinct he'd honed to survive alone, he'd found something worth staying for. In the years that followed, the story of the cursed king and the mercenary Omega who broke his curse became legend. Bards told it in taverns. Scholars wrote it in histories. Children whispered it to each other when they were supposed to be sleeping. Some versions said Theron was a mage in disguise, sent by the gods to free the king from his suffering. Others said he was a ghost, a blade for hire who died in another world and been reborn as the only Omega strong enough to survive the curse. Some even claimed it was love at first sight, that Theron had walked into the throne room and the king had fallen for him instantly, curse be damned. Theron hated all of those versions. It wasn't fate, he told Cormac one evening, years later, when a bard had just finished a particularly dramatic rendition that involved singing swords and magical tears. It wasn't destiny. It wasn't some cosmic design. I didn't break your curse because I was special. I broke it because I refused to perform. Because I set boundaries. Because I treated you like a person instead of a problem. That's not magic. That's just humanity, Cormac finished. I know. He was smiling. He smiled a lot now. It had taken years for the expression to become natural, but it was. Deep lines around his eyes. Easy warmth. The face of a man who'd stopped bracing for pain. But the Omega who treated the king like a person and accidentally broke his curse through the power of clear communication doesn't make for a very good song. It would be a better song. It would be an accurate song. Those are rarely the same thing. Theron snorted. But he didn't argue. Because the truth was, he didn't need the songs to be accurate. He didn't need anyone else to understand what had happened between them. The quiet moments. The hard choices. The way Cormac had held him through the heat and let go the moment he asked. The way Theron had held him through the curse breaking and refused to leave. The way they'd built something together, not on biology, not on fate, not on the desperate urgency of designation, but on choice. Every day. Consciously. Deliberately. Because love wasn't the absence of fear. It was the choice to stay anyway. And Theron Ashford, who'd died once and been reborn in a body that wasn't his, who'd spent 2 lifetimes perfecting the art of leaving, had finally learned how to stay.